YouTube founder community, Booker T and the MG fans, random people on the internet. My name is Giggens, and we are here today to talk about Booker T and the MG's 1970 album, McLemore Avenue, or McLemore Avenue, released on Stax Records in April of 1970. Booker T and the MGs, one of the most, to me and to a lot of other people, one of the most influential soul bands of all time. I mean, without them, tons of music in the 60s wouldn't have existed. They were the house band for Stax, and they played on records from everybody, to Otis Redding, to you name it, they were on it. They were just as influential as like the Funk Brothers up in Detroit, being the backing band for some of the 60s best songs. This is the soundtrack of the 60s. By the time we got to this point, the band had been pretty much set in their ways as the four-piece member that they're basically known for. Steve Cropper on guitar, Booker T. Jones on piano, Hammond B organ, keyboards and some guitars. Then you got Al Jackson Jr. on drums and Donald Duck Dunn on bass. And they had been this way for, at this point, about 5 years. The previous bassist who was on Green Onions left around 1965, and Donald filled in after that, but who was there till he died in 2012. But they are such a talented band, and I feel like they're an underrated band. I feel like they don't get the recognition they deserve, and they don't get the... I don't think they're as known as they could be for having done so much. Which leads me up to this album, McLemore Avenue. Obviously, from the cover, you can probably tell it's meant to be Abbey Road, and this is exactly it. So they do an interpretation of the Beatles' Abbey Road album, which had only come out like a couple months earlier. Lots of glare on this thing. There's my computer screen. That's how I filmed this thing. So anyway, Booker was in California at the time, and he heard this album. He heard Abbey Road. He was blown away by it. He loved the experimentation that the Beatles were doing, where they were going sonically and dynamically, and the outreach of the genre that they were in. Abbey Road is a very different album from anything they had done before, and it's an amazing end to their cycle, because who knows what they could have done next after that album. They were really on top of their game by that point, at the end. So anyway, Booker heard this album, and he was like, you know what, the only way I can really feel that I can say thanks is if I do this album as well. And so that's what they did. They got together, they figured this thing out, and they put their own spin on it, their own arrangement, and it's absolutely one of the most fascinating takes on a Beatles set I've ever heard. When it comes to covering the Beatles, a lot of the magic is gone, because they're trying to capture something that's not there, or they're looking for a feel and they're faking it. It's very, very hard to cover a lot of bands, but particularly the Beatles had a certain special type of magic that if it's not there with your own band, it's not going to be there in the songs that you do, original tracks or otherwise. You need to be yourself, you need to be unique and have your own flavor, and when that happens, that special blend happens, that's when you can create some magic, and that's what happens on this album. Obviously, Booker T and the MGs were a largely instrumental band with very, very few parts ever sung. This album features some of them. So to hear them do an album where vocals were so prominent, especially on tracks like Because, or You Never Give Me Your Money, or The End, where lots of big harmonies happen throughout, to hear them do this album with their own flavor, a little bit of funk, a lot of soul, some rock, some groove, it sets it apart and puts it on its own platform to be taken as its own piece. It's not just a tribute album, it's not just a cover album, it stands alone as a work of art to this band who was insanely talented. So with that, let's jump in. They did this in a slightly different way from the actual album. They did this in melodies. There are a couple of tracks that are stood out on their own, like Something, and I believe I Want You, She's So Happy. Oh, that's part of one band. Something was kind of tagged as a single, so that was like the one song they kind of pegged to be on its own. But they rearranged the track order, and I love how they did that, because it totally transforms the album, gives it a whole different flavor, it takes it to a different place. And so they start the album with side 2 of the record. They start off with the Golden Slumbers medley, Carry That Weight in the end, as the first 3 songs. What I really enjoy about this album is that for an album that obviously we've all sung along to for so long, to hear them capture the essence of the vocals, but done with instruments, and to bring out the texture and the color and the dynamics of the lyrical performance done through an organ or a guitar or a bass purely on those instruments without words is fascinating, because they take something so already unique with a special blend and then make that their own. And it's so fun to listen to. So the album itself opens up with a really mournful, sort of delicate, introspective feel, which, I mean, Golden Slumbers kind of has that feel anyway, but they give it a little bit of a, not a grittier edge, but a little bit more of a, yeah, alright, grittier edge. Yeah, fine, let's go with that. But it's a really fresh capture. You know, I mean, the album was still brand new when they did this. It wasn't like it's been 15 years, oh, let's go do Abbey Road. Like, no, it was like 4 or 5 months old at this point. It wasn't that old. But I really enjoy the groove that they enter. You can tell these guys have been playing together hundreds of hours at this point, and they know how to play off each other. They know what's going to happen next. And that energy, that magnetism is there. Very fun to listen to. They weave seamlessly through each track throughout this entire album, even with the awkward sequencing. And I don't even, awkward's a poor choice of words, but when you're so used to the set list itself and what to expect next and how the album ends, hearing it shuffled up, your first thought is, awkward, but they make it work really well. The atmospheric organ throughout these first few tracks, there's sometimes very peppy drums or sometimes very subtle drums. Al Jackson was a fantastic drummer. He really knew when to jump in, when to hold it back, kind of like Ringo. Same sort of deal. You know, let certain instruments take the lead, and you hold it back. You keep it steady, but you jump in when you feel like it's right. That's the mark of a good drummer. But you know, sometimes you get this really, really like spirited, euphoric feel bursting out of the organs. I particularly like in the end where like Ringo's drum solo would have been. There's a really quick bit of drums, and then it goes into a whole different area. There's just like real thundering, hammering drums throughout this thing. Really crazy organ, and the bit, there's like a little bluesy solo right before the whole "Love You" part. And there's a really nice clean toned guitar that comes in at that point, which takes over for a few bars. And then the part with "and in the end," they come in and sing. Booker T sings. And he's got an excellent voice. So it's really cool to hear him do that. And then just, you know, the cymbals crash through. And it blends really nice right into "Here Comes the Sun" with like a really weird synth. It almost sounds like a really early Moog. It probably is a Moog. But it sounds so computery. And it must have been a very new feel and texture at the time. But again, they make it work because stuff on Abbey Road, a lot of that was new for its time as well. That was the first time the Beatles recorded to, I think, like a 16 track. So they had so many layers to work with. So the material was already good to start with. They had great source material to work with to make your own and blend your own feelings into. But the organ takes over a lot, and there's a really nice jazzy lounge vibe throughout "Here Comes the Sun." Very upbeat major keys, like the hi-hat shuffling away the whole time. It's got this the whole time, which is great. The chorus is big and euphoric, and I really enjoy how they throw in their own interpretation of those chords to make a little bit of a jam to jump right into "Come Together," which has an excellent eerie vibe to it. I mean, the vibe of the original has a slightly eerie tone as well, but like this really captures some of that like just like guttural low end feel. I really like that a lot. Bright, bubbly organ riffs throughout this thing. The drums are pretty spot on. They basically just doing the whole Ringo riff. And then some more vocals near the end with the guys saying "Come Together" a couple of times. Kind of reminds me of like a "Love Supreme," where like the vocals pounce up like randomly. And a mostly instrumental album, and you hear like, you know, a little bit of vocal here and there. And then you get the next track, "Something," which was like a single of sorts. And it's just wonderful. It really is really nice. It's so expertly performed. You know, with so much love and care. It's amazing how when you're a fan of something and you really are good at your craft, you can pay tribute by making something your own and also showing off the strengths of the original track at the same time. So you're taking the best of both worlds. The original recording yourself that was inspiring to you, and then jumping into it with your own flavor and showing off what it can be. how it's interpreted to the listener and what they get out of it as well. Sometimes with awful results. So many times when you cover a song, it sounds terrible, but these guys did it right. The original recordings, nature, the spirit and the soul, it's rechanneled through this. The Beatles were so on top of their game at this point, and just as intelligent and talented as Booker T and the MGs. So when they take that material and do their own thing, you're gonna capture a bit of that spirit because they got their own spirit there, and you feel that through the music. So very, very cool. And then you get on to side two. So we start off with Because, and then You Never Give Me Your Money. I really like the eerie vibe that creeps up through this thing too. The really cautious drumming in the beginning. I like that timid sort of like, I'm here in the background, but I'm not going to make my presence known kind of drumming. The moody, slow groove throughout this thing. The bluesy guitar solo, excellent addition. And then they make it their own a little bit through the track. They do some of their own jamming just before hitting a really funky groove to get into You Never Give Me Your Money. Very head bobbing, really tricky guitar work throughout this thing, all kinds of guitar licks that happen throughout this. It's a great jam until the fade out, so very cool. And then band two, and track two, whatever you want to call it, is Sun King, Mean Mr. Mustard, Polythene Pam, She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, closing off with I Want You, She's So Heavy. The organ mixed in with that vibrato guitar, kind of that really shaky guitar, excellent. Absolutely love that on Sun King. Very fun to listen to. The constant tom-tom work is in full effect, giving lots of texture and dynamic to the low end. And then it blasts into a real faithful rendition of Mean Mr. Mustard. Just an absolute rocker throughout that thing. It gets explosive with Polythene Pam. It gives it a whole new life. It's an already exciting song, but you give it a whole different flavor when you add like that organ. I mean, the organ sound is so lively and enthusiastic, and it gets you so much more excited to listen to that music. Even though it's already great music, it adds another extra element. It's like when you add a brass section to a band. It gives it that big, bright spark of life, Very cool. But then you get to She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, and that segues, it comes in after Polythene Pam really well. You don't even realize there's a transition there because they do it so cleanly, and I love that. And then you get to cap it off with a really insane take of I Want You, She's So Heavy. The guitar of that thing, the hammering drums, the subtle organ work throughout some of this thing, and the fluttering bass through like the verse parts of it lead to just an explosive cacophony throughout the rest of the track. I mean, they're just like going wild with this thing because it's such a cool groove to rock to anyway. But what an ending. I mean, like the breaks creep along very nicely. They speed it up towards the end. It gets super powerful. The organ is just doing this insane soloing. The drums are smashing away. And then before you know it, it's over. And you're just kind of left like, holy moly, this thing was absolutely fantastic to listen to. And that's it. That's the whole album. I discovered this through a friend of mine. I was over their house one time. Their dad was playing this album, and I never heard it before, years ago. And I was like, what is this thing? Like, I knew Booker T and the MGs. I knew Green Onions. I knew a couple other things, but I never heard this. And so I kept it in the back of my mind. I went to my favorite record store the next day, and it just happened to be there. They had, like, just got a copy in, and I was like, all right, this is meant to be. And so I rushed back home, threw it on the turntable, and just got lost in it. And I put this thing on a few times a year, and I absolutely love it every single time I hear it. The magic, the atmosphere, the sophistication, the love, and the talent, and the groove, and right down to the cover art with, the guys walking on the front cover to the back cover with, like, the legs, just like on the back of Abbey Road. Everything about this was done so faithfully and with so much care and thought that it's easily one of the best Beatles-esque tribute cover works, whatever you want to call it, out there. Yeah, I mean, like Stevie Wonder's We Could Work It Out is an excellent example of taking a song and making it your own and showing the strengths of the song reinterpreted in a different way. That's an excellent version of that song. But, yeah, the musicianship throughout this whole thing, they're all arranged expertly. I love the track listing. I love the way they made medleys out of these things. It's just wonderful. And when you, like I said a million times throughout this review, when you cull already talented work and give that to very talented musicians who know what they're doing, you're going to get another good piece of work. And, you know, they were so in tune with each other at this point, and, you know, to make it funky, to make it soulful, is an excellent way to pay tribute to one of the best albums of all time with Abbey Road. While this album is 99% instrumental, the music moves you and compels you so much, and it's so strong and colorful that you forget that there were words to begin with. Like, you don't really need to have words on this album. It works so well and tells so much of a story on its own, without even needing words. Some instrumental music leaves you lacking, where you're like, man, I wish there was something else going on here. But when you have enough power and dynamicism, if that's a word, conviction and storytelling behind your instrument, you play your instrument so soulfully, that's all the story you need. You don't need lyrics. And so you can take this album exactly as it is without words, and not even consider the fact that there were words originally. You don't need them on this. This plays out as its own drama. It's fantastic. Even if you've never heard Abbey Road before and this was the first exposure you had to it, that would be enough. That would be fine. You can go to Abbey Road next and still have an insane appreciation for that album and this album at the same time. You know, one of the most important bands of the 60s paying tribute to another of the most important bands of the 60s. And in true Beatles form, they're being themselves, they're being original, doing things their way, and showing off their strengths and talents without trying to copy anybody else or do what other people are doing. And that's what the Beatles were basically trying to do, their own thing. And that Booker T and the MGs have done it on this album as well. The only thing they don't do is cover Octopus's Garden. Oh well. I mean, I love that song, but would have been cool to see it on here. Another fun fact about this thing, Steve Cropper actually wasn't even present for the actual recording of the album as a group. He came in later, and Booker T was like, hey man, these are the parts I want you to play on guitar, can you do this? And they figured it out and got it done. Steve had not even heard the album yet. He heard a couple of tracks here and there, and once he finally heard the Abbey Road album after they finished this, it blew his mind. So basically he was hearing, Booker T's interpretation of an album that he never even heard before, and he was still locked in with so much soul. So not even having heard Abbey Road, and just giving your own texture and your own character to the music is just testament enough to the strengths and talents of these guys. So that's it. Kind of a long video here, but easily a 9 out of 10 for this album for me. Absolute smash of an album. I adore this thing. I love so much about it. Yeah, I'd give it a 10 out of 10, I think, if Octopus's Garden was on here, just because then you'd have a complete album, but I'll give it a 9 because I absolutely love it. So that's it. My name is Giggens. This has been Album Reviews with Booker T and the MGs, McLemore Avenue, released on Stax Records in 1970, in April of that year. This happens to be a 2010 reissue, so it's not an original, but close enough. Original issues are out there. They don't pop up too often in the wild anyway, from what I've come across over the years, but I don't know. This thing sounds fantastic the way it is. I'm happy with this, but that's it. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Giggens. This has been Album Reviews with Booker T and the MGs, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks.